Adventure on the Plains by Jonathan Taylor. Read by Jonathan Taylor. Chapter 10. Santa Fe and the Decision. The next day Jack woke up to the sound of the sailors preparing breakfast. Then he remembered the fight of the night before, and hoped he wouldn't have to do that again. He dressed and climbed out of his tent to see the sun coming brightly out of a cloudless sky. "Well, glad to see ya, Jack. How'd you sleep last night?" greeted Uncle Bill as he walked up with a bandage around his arrow wounded. "Why, I felt like I could sleep all day. Have you seen any more Indians?" "No, I reckon they learned their lesson not to mess with us any more." Just then the dinner bell rang. They went to get some breakfast. While eating their breakfast of cornbread and milk, Jeff asked Jeff Thompson what had happened in their attack on the other Indian camp. "We didn't have to do much when we got to the top. We made a yell and fired some shots in the air before charging toward their camp. The startled Comanches were terrified. When they saw us, they ran to their horses and fled away. We didn't have to shoot at any of them." "Sounds like you had an easier time of it, though maybe the Indians would have fought if they had their chief leading them." Jack then relayed their adventures with the other party led by Chief Black Hawk. He told them about how a rock had alerted the two on watch, and how they had gone and hid. How the Indians were awoken by the attack of the sentinels, and then the Indians led by their chief attacked them, but they were finally driven off. Then finally that Bill had talked with the chief's wounded son Little Bear, and had agreed to persuade the Indians that they were friends, and did not want to steal anything. Jeff seemed quite pleased. "Well, I congratulate you, Jack, for your bravery and skill that the men say were demonstrated last night. Most boys would have been afraid, but you were quite calm like the rest." Breakfast was soon finished and the wagon train again started moving. They soon left the canyon and were back in the open plains. After traveling for a few miles, Jack saw that up ahead there were many trees around a big river. It was the mighty Santa Fe River, and even with the lack of rain it was still quite large. They made camp for the night beside the river in preparation for the work tomorrow. The next day they got up and ate a quick breakfast. During breakfast, Bill explained to Jack that they had not crossed the river in their wagon since it was too deep, so they would make large rafts to float down the river a few miles until they came to Santa Fe. They all soon set to work by first cutting down many of the trees. They would cut the logs lengthwise in half down the middle. Then they would hollow out the logs. Once done, they would attach 4 or 5 of these together, with some logs lashed crosswise. The rafts could usually carry 2 wagons, with the horses, donkeys, and steers would have to walk on the riverbed, as the water wouldn't go over their heads if they stayed close to the bank. After 4 days of hard work, the 30 rafts were built. The sailors piled up their covered wagons with the supplies, and then loaded the wagons on their rafts. The men had also made some oars to steer the rafts downstream. Jeff gave the signal, and the rafts were pushed out one by one into the river. The raft Jack was on was pushed out last, with the 2 extra supply wagons on board. Soon they were all going down the river at a good pace, with the animals walking along behind. Jack and Bill were at the back of their raft, and Jack was holding the reins of 3 donkeys who were surprisingly calm. Bill, on the other hand, was holding the 2 horses, Shadow and Bill's horse, both of which were in a great panic, and yanked him off the raft into the water. But after a while they calmed down, and the trip went quite smoothly. When it would start to get dark, they would steer the rafts close to shore, tie them up, and camp there for the night. Thus they traveled for 2 days, when on the 3rd day they saw their destination, the town of Santa Fe, in the distance. It was quite a large town close to the river, with a large fort not far away from it. They steered the rafts to the bank and tied them up to some stumps. The sailors unloaded their rafts, and Jack and Bill helped them. By this time the residents of the town saw that more sailors were coming. Some came running out to meet their relatives in the wagon train. There was much rejoicing as Jack and Bill followed them all back to the town. It was quite a large town with many cabins and small shops. The fort a little ways away was a big stockade made of logs and a square tower in each of the four corners. In the middle was a large wooden building to house the garrison. After they had done all that they could with unpacking the rafts, Bill and Jack found Jeff Thompson, who was very grateful for the help, and paid them each $50. "You have done good work, Jack, and learned quite a bit on this trip. Do you have any plans of what you want to do now?" "There will be another wagon train being fitted out in 3 months, but I couldn't find you any work until then." "I'm not exactly sure, but I was thinking about learning the tricks of being a cowboy. Maybe I could find one just before they have their cattle drive, and see if I could help out. My family back in Philadelphia don't need me until next month." "Well, I know just a ranch to grow to," said Bill. "I used to work at the Diamond Square ranch some before I became a scout. I was a-thinking that I would quit being a scout as I'm just getting a little too old for this. I could go with Jack to the Diamond Square and get some work there, since they're always a-looking for more help on the ranch out." "Well, it'd sure be hard to leave you after you were working with me for 16 years, but you are getting older now, and I know there will be many young men wanting your place if you left." "I think it'd be best, but I'll give you my decision in the morning." With that, Bill and Jack went to their hotel, and quickly fell asleep after a tiring day. Chapter 11. Cowboys. The next day, Bill had made up his mind to retire from being a scout and work at the Diamond Square Ranch for a while. Bill and Jack said goodbye to Jeff Thompson. He was a little disappointed, but said that he could find a replacement, and wished them success on their work. Jack saddled his trusty horse Shadowmane and put some extra food he had brought from the town into his saddlebag. He checked that his pistols were working before the two mounted. They rode out of the town and crossed the river at the shallowest point. Soon the town of Santa Fe was lost from view, and they were back on the open plains. The Diamond Square Ranch was in the northern part of Texas, so they would have to ride southeast for 3 days to get to the ranch. During their travels, they would many times see a buffalo herd, but they didn't try shooting any because they would be too tough to shoot with a pistol, and they had a lot more meat than was needed for 2 people. Sometimes they would also see a Mexican herdsman called vaqueros. They would herd the purebred wild horses for wealthy horse breeders down in Mexico. They looked almost comical to Jack with their long black hair and mustache underneath a big white sombrero, but they were almost unrivaled in their ability to throw a long lasso from 60 feet away over the horses' heads. After 3 days, they finally came in sight of the ranch. It was in a little valley, and there was a barn and a bunkhouse. There was also a large fence with some of the more valuable animals. Around the bunkhouse were a few cowboys smoking their pipes and talking. They looked up when they saw the strangers approach, and as they got closer, they seemed to recognize Bill. "Well, if that ain't Bill Bronco, I'll eat my hat," said one. "Where'd you been all this time?" Just a-working on a wagon train up north as their scout. This last trip I needed an assistant, so Jack Bedford here has been helping. After we came to Santa Fe, I decided to quit since I'm getting a little too old for that, so we came down here to see if there's any work to do." "Glad to meet you," said the cowboy, and he shook their hands. "Well, as to work, there's plenty to do. We're just getting ready to go on the roundup, so there'll be work for everyone." "Well, that looks like a fine horse, Jack. Where'd you get him?" "Back in Philadelphia. 2 men wanted to get rid of him, and I was out to get him at a good deal. His name is Shadowmane." "Well, if you want to do most of the work with a horse like that, other steers can injure or kill a horse. He would do good for looking after the steers, but you'll want to use other horses for the hard work. We would usually rope up some of the wild broncos and use them for the roundup." "Well, hello there," said the ranch owner, George Dunfield, as he came over the bunkhouse. "Glad to see you again if you're looking for any work. I need some extra hands for the coming roundup. I could pay you and your friend $40 a month. That's what we're here for, though I don't know take Jack so long to learn the work. He already knows how to shoot a colt and throw a lasso. After everyone was introduced, they went to the bunkhouse for supper. It was a room with a long table, on which was spread meat, potatoes, milk, and fresh bread, baked by Hot Boy the cook. The food quickly disappeared, as they all had a good appetite. After supper, the men lighted their pipes and went outside. Jack looked with interest at the cowboys. They wore hats with a wide, straight brim made of tough felt. All wore flannel shirts with a handkerchief round their throats. Their trousers were of soft tan leather, over which they wore chaparajos, or Mexican overalls, and a few had jackets on. They were a rough, active bunch, but quiet in manner. All of them carried a revolver in a holster on their hip, had a long knife stuck in their sash, and wore high boots. Some had spurs on their boots. Soon they all went to the low rooms that partitioned off the back of the bunkhouse as sleeping quarters. Bill and Jack laid out their blankets that they brought on their bunks and went to sleep. Chapter 12. The Cattle Drive. Hooves pounding the ground, dust everywhere, and the shouts of cowboys filled the air. It was a day when the cowboys would gather all the broncos or wild horses that had been wandering on the plains from the last roundup to the ranch to be branded. They would hold the horses down and use a hot iron to brand the diamond square symbol onto the horses, so everyone would know what ranch they belonged to. Then a person called a bronco breaker would be hired to ride the wild broncos until they stopped their bucking and could be used. Jack watched with amazement as the guy was being whipped around on the creature's back with such ferocity, yet somehow he managed to stay on. This could take some time with the real bad ones, but he kept digging his spurs into the horse whenever it slacked until it gave up and stood there tired and panting. Jack thought he'd give a try at one of the horses, so he roped one and tried to pull it to come to the edge of the enclosure. "You might want to try an easier one for a start, Jack," said Bronco Bill, who was nearby. "That feller looks mighty rawed." "Well, I'll just give a try at riding him. I may as well start with a harder one." Bill helped him haul the horse in, and held it while Jack climbed on. Then he let the critter free, and before Jack knew what was happening, the horse dropped its head to the ground, and then suddenly jerked upright, sending Jack flying over his head to the ground. The men let out a roar of laughter, as Jack got up, dazed and shaken, to his feet. "I suppose that is bucking," said Jack. "Sure thing," said Tubby Watson. "Next time, try to keep his head up and keep your back loose. It takes a lot of practice." After a few minutes, he tried again, and was able to stay on longer than last time. On the third try, he could see the animal tiring, so he dug his spurs into its flank. It then commenced a series of jerks that made Jack dizzy, but in the end the horse finally gave up and stood panting. There was a cheer from the onlookers watching. "You're the toughest tenderfoot I've ever seen do something like that," said one named Pocus Pete. "Most would have taken longer to break him, especially since this is your first experience." Jack took it out for some runs until he was satisfied that it was broke. After supper, he went to bed quite stiff and sore, but pleased with his accomplishments. The next day was roundup day. The cowboys woke up early, ate breakfast, and got prepared for the cattle drive. Hot Boy, who was quite a fat cook, got the cook wagon hitched up and loaded it up with meat and his cooking utensils. The rest packed up their blankets and loaded their gear onto their horses. Jack whistled for Charlemagne, who came galloping down over the plains to him, eager to do some work. Bill, who was the oldest, was appointed as director of the outfit. When all was ready, they started out over the plains. After a few miles, each cowboy spread out in different directions to look out for the steers. Jack went with Pocus Pete to an overlooking hill to see if they could see any. "I don't see any," said Jack. Pocus Pete, who was searching the horizon with his more practiced eye, said, "I think I see a small herd over there in the valley. We'll have to ride quietly around behind them